Okay, today's lesson we are going to start with Section 2, Decline and Fall of the Empire. In this section you're going to learn three things. First, you'll summarize the weaknesses that emerged in the Roman Empire during the 200s AD. Second, describe Diocletian's attempt to strengthen the empire by dividing it. And finally, you'll be able to analyze Constantine's ongoing efforts at reform in the Roman Empire. So let's get started. We'll start with talking about the weaknesses that developed in the Roman Empire. First, we'll discuss economic problems. Okay, by the 100s AD, the empire had stopped expanding. When it stopped expanding, it really meant an end to any kind of new resources that would have developed if Rome kept conquering new lands. As a result of this, the Roman government raised taxes, which obviously would create hardships for some of the poorer citizens. There was a decline in agriculture that also weakened the empire. Constant warfare and overuse of the farmland destroyed the land. And, of course, there wasn't any new kind of technology development, so farmers still had to rely on slaves rather than new tools to do all the work. So, as a result of all that, food shortages occurred. There were military problems also. That was another weakness. Constant warfare with the nomadic tribes. These nomadic tribes came from the northern parts of Europe. We call them the Germanic tribes. They were also called Barbarians by the Romans, but that was one of the problems. Also, the Romans hired mercenaries to fight for them. By hiring mercenaries, these mercenaries were being paid to fight. They weren't there because they were Roman and fighting for Rome. They were being paid, and so they didn't really have a lot of loyalty toward Rome. The soldiers were less disciplined than normal, and they were less loyal. They were more out for themselves, not for anyone else. Two more problems that weakened the Roman Empire were political and social. Under political, the empire was just way too big for one person to govern. As you can see from the map, this whole empire was just way too big. The purple and orange areas is part of the Roman Empire. Just too big. And so because of that, it was hard to defend. So the Germanic tribes were constantly attacking, again, making it weaker, making the empire weaker. Government officials were corrupt, and the cost of education increased, so it made it more difficult for citizens to get a good education, and by that, they were less informed on civic matters, meaning government matters. Okay, we're transitioning into a new area called Rome divides into East and West. Just a minute ago I had mentioned how the Roman Empire was just way too big. And so we're going to talk about how that will divide. But during a 50-year span between 235 and 284 AD, Rome had 37 emperors. That's a whole bunch of emperors in that short amount of time. Out of the 37 who were emperors during that time period, 34 of them either died during a civil war or they were assassinated. Not much sense of order and safety in the empire if you're having all your emperors die in that short amount of time. In 284, an emperor comes to power named Diocletian. He is going to restore order, and he's going to do this by ruling the empire with an iron fist and tolerating very little opposition. He changed the way that the army operated by permanently placing soldiers along the empire's borders. Also, to kind of change the economics of the empire, he introduced reforms such as lowering the price of bread in order for the poor to afford to buy it. Diocletian realized that, again, the empire was just way too big and he could not rule it effectively, so he divided it into two different parts. As you see in the map here, you have the orange area, which was the Western Empire, still based out of Rome, and then you have the purple area, and with the center being Constantinople. At that time, under Diocletian, was called Byzantium. Diocletian will choose to rule the eastern part, which is the purple area, out of Byzantium, and then he appoints an emperor for the orange area, or the western side. His name is Maximilian. Together, they ruled the Roman Empire for 20 years. Now, Maximilian basically reported to Diocletian. So Diocletian was really still the man in charge, but Maximilian was kind of like the governor almost of the western half, and he reported to Diocletian. In 306 AD, a civil war will break out once again. And this civil war was between about three different guys, one of them being a guy named Constantine, who was already the emperor. But two other of his rivals wanted to take control of the empire. So a civil war does break out. And we talked about Constantine and this civil war in the last section. That's pretty much how he converted to Christianity. Anyway, Constantine will emerge victorious in this civil war and continue to rule. At this particular point, he decides to move the capital of the Roman Empire from Rome, where it's always been, to Byzantium, where Diocletian ruled from, and he will rename the city Constantinople. Constantinople is right here. If you can follow my little white circle there. Constantinople is in that white circle. Very important city, right on the seas, great trading city. Now that the empire is divided in half, the eastern side is going to remain strong, but the western side, it's finally going to fall, and that's the title of this section, The Western Empire Falls. Beyond Rome's borders to the north were the Germanic tribes, who were considered barbarians by the Romans. Why they were considered barbarians? Well, to the Roman, a barbarian was basically just an uncivilized person. So maybe it was because they're hairy or smelly or they ate with their hands. Whatever, they called them barbarians. The Germanic groups started to push into Roman lands for a number of reasons. They might be looking for new land. They were looking for wealth, because Rome was wealthy. Or they were searching for safety because another Germanic group called the Huns were attacking, and a lot of those Germanic troops were a little afraid of the Huns. In 410, Germanic peoples attacked and plundered the city of Rome. To plunder means to loot or to take things by force. That was just the first event. In 476, another Germanic group called the Vandals will eventually conquer the city of Rome. And when that happens, it marks the end of the Western Roman Empire. It did not end the eastern side of the empire, just the western side based out of Rome. In 486, another group called the Franks will take over the remaining western lands that weren't taken by the Vandals. And the Franks were led by a guy named Clovis. And they will form a kingdom called the Frankish Kingdom. There's Clovis in the picture. As a result of all this, the aftermath of the fall of Rome, roads and other public structures fell apart, trade declined, and the Roman Catholic Church will become a very powerful organization in Western Europe. The end.